Well, television was king then.
Yeah.
Not that it's not now, but in those shows, Knight Rider, Kit would show up, and you would have people who were either dressed like Michael or whatever. Especially with the A-Team, we would show up with people. I mean, I don't mean to switch to another show, but
not at all.
The A-Team, you would have people who were dressed like Mr. T or like one of the other characters' kids. And I think for I'll tell you two stories. I'll tell you the when I was doing the A-Team, Mr. T could never say my name.
Really?
So when he would see me, he'd say, "Hey, my man, how you doing? My man." And I say, "Hey, T, how you doing?" "Okay, good." So then one day we were at craft service, and I'm standing there, and T comes up with the script for the next week's show. And dialogue. I keep telling them, don't be writing me so much dialogue. I don't like dialogue. Now this is an actor complaining because he's got lines. You know what I mean? I just thought that was really hilarious. But I really had a problem with the A-Team. Before, I told you I worked at a community agency, and we did a lot of stuff.
Locations, go to 2.
Where's that person that's not answering?
Go for location.
This is Kokayi Ampah, location manager, producer, director.
This is Alison Taylor, location manager.
And you are listening to
Locations on 2.
And this is Dodd Vickers, your host for Locations on 2, the podcast that takes you around the world on set with location professionals in the film, television, and commercial industries. Find out more by visiting locationsonto.com. You can also find me online at doddvickers.com. Locations on 2 is brought to you by the Location Managers Guild International, a global organization of location professionals in the film, television, and commercial industries. Find out more by visiting them online at locationmanagers.org. On this special 2-part episode of the podcast, I'm joined by Kokayi Ampah, the first African-American location manager and a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Also joining us is Alison Taylor, the most recognized female African-American location manager, and together they've managed everything from the A-Team and Knight Rider to Shawshank Redemption, Underground Railroad, Straight Out of Compton, and much more. It's time now to switch on over to the back channel where the real work gets done on set. Locations on 2. Hey, Alison, how are you?
Hello.
And hey, Kokayi, how are you today?
Good morning.
Is it morning, Kokayi?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, in Hawaii.
Oh.
You're not in Hawaii.
Okay.
You're not in Hawaii, are you, Kokayi?
No.
Okay.
It's morning there.
Okay, I got it now.
No, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Yeah, it's good.
Afternoon.
It's good to have both of you on the show. No, I had to ask if you were in Hawaii because it seems like everybody that I talk to in this field that's in Hawaii has some connection to Hawaii Five-0, and I have a friend, Shy McBride, who is on that show, and he had a band called Covert when we waited tables together back in the day.
Wow.
Yeah, he had a band called Covert, and their album was For Your Boutte Only, and he gave me a copy. He thought it was his big break back in the day. Before
How many times have you played that around the
house? Well, I have it.
Yeah, it's funny too. But anyway, okay, let's go.
Well, I am very excited about this episode because when I started the podcast, if you had told me that I was going to have the king of the West Coast chili empire and the person behind Project Greenlight on the same podcast, I'd have called you a liar. But maybe that's
kind of limiting my chili world, but that's okay.
Well, maybe we should start with the chili. Tell us about your chili. Well, first of all, Kokayi Ampah and Alison Taylor are joining me. Thanks for being here, both of you. It's really, really great to talk to you for the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. It really is. The chili, I started making chili around 1970, 71. The true story is that I was going with a woman who had 5 kids. This is the real story. And that was my contribution to feeding the kids, was making chili. And I started with Hormel, and then I started adding ingredients, and then I eventually started making it from scratch. So as I say, it came out of love. And been making it ever since. And now I supply a restaurant in Leimert Park, the Hot and Cool Cafe, with the turkey chili, but I make a turkey, a salmon, and a vegetarian chili. So hopefully, but we don't know. The restaurants are in such a situation right now. I was hoping to expand to more restaurants this year. But, with this whole COVID thing, restaurants are paring down their menus just primarily for takeout, and those that have outdoor dining here in California are doing that. So it may be another year or so, but I've got other ways to develop.
Can you order online, or can people find it anywhere?
No, not yet. And I'm debating on whether I'm going to package just the seasonings and send it, and
that's a good
maybe
idea.
make that online.
Yeah,
that's a possibility too.
And Alison, I'm assuming you've had his famous chili.
Oh, absolutely. It's really good.
Well,
I love his chili.
Well, you're going to have to send me some Kokayi, even though it's not supposed to be shipped. I really am anxious to try this.
Okay.
Well, obviously, I'm very excited about this episode of the podcast. We work in an industry with incredible diversity. Kokayi, you're known as and recognized for being the first African-American black man to be a location manager in the industry. And Alison is the most prominent female African-American location manager. Alison, did you start off working with Kokayi, or did you work with somebody else? I don't remember if I've ever...
I started out with someone else. I started out with Gary DeGala and Kristen Dewey, actually. And when I first started, which was 1995, I think, every place I went, people would say to me, "Have you met Kokayi? Have you met Kokayi?" And it was interesting to me because at first I didn't understand why they would say that to me. And then I realized, okay, this is a black man. And of course, the first thing is, they're saying, "Have you met like the other black person?" Wow. There were more of us, but it's kind of like that. And then, Then, though, they would all tell me how great he was. And so to tell you how long ago it was, I started writing him letters, trying to introduce myself to him so that I could go to work for him. And then he finally called me. So that's how that happened.
So it worked, obviously.
Yeah, it did work.
Kokayi, do you remember getting these letters from Alison?
I don't actually remember the letters, but it must have been because I did call her. And I can remember, what was the first show we worked on? What was that? At Warner Hollywood, right?
No, the first show was BAPS, but when I met you, when you finally called me, this is how long ago this is, Dodd, that we have to remind each other how this worked. But he was wrapping up Mars Attacks.
Okay,
And he went ahead and called me just like, okay, who is this woman that's writing me these letters? So I came in and met him. And so then he called me on, I guess, the next project.
Yeah, so that's why I say Warner Hollywood, because our Mars Attacks office were at Warner Hollywood, and he came in, and that's where we first met. Yeah,
right.
Okay.
It's not the first time somebody's mentioned doing something like that on the show, where they mention they find out a movie's in town, or a certain producer or location manager's in town, and they write a letter, and they're trying to get on the show. Do you remember what your letter said, Alison?
Oh, my goodness. I can't remember what it said, but it basically was standard old school cover letter introducing myself. I'm new in the business, and what little resume I had at the time. And that, that I have heard of him several times, because we weren't really, we weren't we weren't doing all that stuff back then. Right. So it was standard, put it in the mail. I think I had just gotten in the union. So I was union at that point, and I was able to write. But it was just a solicitation. I mean, it wasn't the same as showing up on set. Location people don't do that as much. I know stunt folks do that, but
I had a guy do that.
Did you?
Do that. Yeah, Paul Lucero, the late Paul Lucero.
Lucero. Oh,
yeah.
And so he just showed up and said, "Hey, I want to go to work. I want to work for you."
Yeah, he would show up at a few of my locations. So eventually I hired him, but it was pretty interesting.
Oh wow. Yeah, well, I took the old school, Dot. I wrote the letter and mailed it and hoped for a response. I think I wrote him twice, maybe 3 times. I know that there was at least 2 letters before he responded to me, but I think it was maybe 3.
And you regret it to this day, don't you, Kokayi?
No, it was wonderful.
Yeah. No, Alison is fantastic. And, I'll tell you this story. I don't think I mentioned it to you before we got on the show, Kokayi, but I got to work with Alison in Savannah. I was scouting for a show, and the manager that was working the show couldn't stay, and they had to find somebody else to jump in. And he came to me and said, you've been scouting for this. I hope you stay and help them make the transition. I said I would, but I wasn't sure if I was going to stay for the entire thing. Then I met Alison and liked her so much, I really did want to stay. And even though I was away from my family for an extended period, it was a great experience, and loved working with her.
Well, you're lucky because they actually offered me that show, so you probably would have gone home early.
I don't know. So far, I feel pretty good about you, especially.
Yeah, see, so sometimes,
especially if you're going to make chili.
Distance makes the heart fonder, so that's a good thing. Yeah, but I at this point, I just wasn't wanting to travel, and I knew Alison. I thought it would be a great piece for Alison, and I knew I don't know what she was. Was she the controller of the show at that time?
Okay.
Was a friend of mine, and that's how it came to me. And so then I said, no, but you might want to try. And then again, they were trying to do as many women in the crew and stuff like that. So it was even a better fit. So,
absolutely. No, when you're doing a biopic about Gloria Steinem, you definitely want to make sure that the crew reflects, the diversity of a
good representation anyway. So
yeah, absolutely.
So it worked. It really worked well. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think we had a pretty good time. Didn't you have a good time, Alison? I know I did.
I did. And that was, I knew nothing of Savannah before I got there. So,
right.
And then, that led me to the next project. So right place, right time. So,
right. The Underground Railroad, for people that don't know.
Right. The Underground Railroad, Amazon Limited series, because there was a TV series called Underground that people mixed us up with all the time.
Oh, yeah, but I'm sure. Well, I guess we should go ahead and do this chronologically and start with your background in history, Kokayi, and how you got into the industry. As I mentioned in the prelude, you're recognized as the first African-American location manager. I was trying to go back to, I know you did things before 1982, and IMDb only starts your listing of work in 1982. So when did
well, it starts at 82.
Yeah, I mean, it starts with Help Wanted, and Cagney and Lacey is credited. A-Team, you've got a credit for, but I know you also had done Knight Rider, which you're not, and Fall Guy, which I don't see anything listed for you at all for those two.
Yeah, I did that, and I did another movie called Dark Passage, which was a TV movie. So I did a few TV movies in that time. And then, really, I had a span where I did nothing but music videos. And, I was like the king of music videos, and that's what I did. I did like Madonna, Billy Idol, the Righteous Brothers, the theme song for Moonlighting with Al Jarreau. So I was like the king of music videos for a while. I can remember we were doing the first $100,000 video was for the band Chicago.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
And one of our shooting days was the day Marvin Gaye got killed. So that was quite an interesting day on the set. And and I try to keep it real in terms of when I talk about career. Along that time, and that was just before that. And that was just before I did Color Purple. Was like 84. Okay, and then after that was primarily features. But I had a little bout with drugs and alcohol too, so that kind of limited the stuff I did. And music videos fit really well into that time period.
Oh gosh, not to make light of it, but
I mean, if you want to be real about stuff, and I say that so because if anybody has a problem, they know me or don't know me, they're welcome to call me. Because awesome. It's something that it keeps me sober is be able to talk to other people, but. Yeah, so a lot of that was that music video, which put me into a whole new a line of people and a way of doing things. I don't know if you know who Callie Corey is. Do you know Callie Corey?
No, I don't know Callie Corey.
She was a UPM at one of the houses that was doing the music videos, and I worked with her really closely. And she would keep telling us about the script she was writing, and everybody was, yeah, because everybody's writing a script, right? And it turned out to be Thelma and Louise.
Really?
And
Wow.
and so she really got big time. And, so whenever we see each other, we laugh about the music video times that we had together. So, yeah. So I met a lot of people, a lot of good people on that. And, but, it was crazy hours but I was in a crazy state. So it was all right.
So, I'd be curious about the time where you got into the business. Where, how did you approach the industry? And, where did you grow up? What was your background and interest?
I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I graduated from high school in 1968, so people can do their math. That year, the year before that year was, the streets were on fire. I mean, my senior year in April, Martin Luther King was killed.
Oh.
And then on graduation day, Bobby Kennedy was killed.
Oh, wow.
And the Ford Foundation put together a program, some funding for the PBS affiliates, at least the one in Minnesota and the Twin Cities, to get young people, especially from the inner city, into television. And I was selected to be one of the people. And it was a group of us. We did a 6-week training program at the PBS affiliate. And we learned television production. So we actually learned to operate the cameras, to do the technical directing, to do the sound directing, the sound mixing, and to produce and floor direct the show. So we learned every aspect of the show. So then after the 6 weeks, we produced a 1-hour primetime show called Black Voices. And every week you did a different job. So one week I may be the producer. The next week I could be the camera operator or the floor director or whatever jobs that we had learned. So for that year, those 52 shows, I got pretty well-rounded television background. And then and it saved my life. It saved my life because I almost didn't graduate from high school because I had no interest. And there's a gentleman by the name of Mahmoud El-Kati who was a historian. He worked at Macalester College in Black history and African history. And in my senior year after football, because I played football, I was, decent. I was all city tackle. But I didn't have any more interest. But we would meet with him after school, and he would tell us about Black history and stuff like that. And so, you learn the thing about Juneteenth. Like we learned all that then. And what spurred me on was to go back to school and argue with the teachers about why they weren't teaching us this stuff. And that's what really, got me through high school, finish high school. And, I got kicked out for not standing for the Pledge of Allegiance and all that stuff in my senior year. But then with the television happening that summer, it really spurred me on, and it didn't hurt that I went to work with a guy who was Gordon Parks' nephew.
Oh, wow.
And Gordon would let us come and watch him make real movies, and then I was really hooked.
That's awesome.
How did you get selected? Like, if you were just holding on at high school, what got you selected to that program?
Well, because I was one of the vocal militants in the community. That's the real truth. And the people at the Urban League, some people at the Urban League and other people knew me because I was one of those people, when they go get the young militant and interview them on TV, I'd be one of those people. and I mean, this is the truth. And then I was interacting with them in meetings, in community meetings, I got to the point where I never wanted to go to a meeting again. And as many meetings as we have in the film business, I think about that because, it was always, reacting to something, right? Why they were taking our homes and not giving us enough money to rebuild or and all of that stuff. So I was pretty vocal, and they thought, maybe we'll get him to be quiet. He'll go over here and be in this program or whatever. They thought maybe I had a potential. So it wasn't based on my academic record or anything like that. It's just that they thought I might have had the potential to do something there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so that's interesting.
So what was your interest in film and possibly getting into the film industry before your exposure to this program? I mean, you mentioned the lucky opportunity you had to work with Gordon Parks, fantastic photographer and filmmaker. You know, what was the...
well, like I said, I worked at this agency called the Inner City Youth League. And the director, his uncle was Gordon Parks. And Gordon Parks, if people don't know, was a known photographer for Life magazine, and then went on to direct the first studio film by an African-American director. It was called The Learning Tree. And Gordon would invite my boss or his nephew to come and watch him make film. So he went down and watched him make the Learning Tree. Mm-hmm. And when he did the second Shaft film, Bobby Hickman is his name, asked, well, can I bring Kokayi with me? And he said, well, bring him with me. So we went to New York, and the first real movie set I was on was on Shaft's big score. And it was just, because Gordon at that time wanted as many people of color behind the scenes as well. Mm-hmm. So I saw, makeup people, and I saw, ADs and stuff like that. And I knew then, having had that year in television, I wanted to do it. Plus, we had made our own film in Minnesota with our little camera and our crew. And, we were lighting. I was the DP. We were lighting sets with, like, if you wanted to knock the light down, you put the shade on the light, on the lamp. Or if you wanted brighter light, you took the shade, off, stuff like that. And we made a feature film called Hampton Alexander. It never got any theater time, but it is listed, from what I'm told, in the Minnesota Historical Society as the first feature film totally produced by African Americans in Minnesota.
Really? Oh, wow.
And anyway, so then when I got a chance to see the big time, it was great. And then a couple of years later, he was making a film called Leadbelly, about Huddy Ledbetter, who was a folk and blues singer at the turn of the century, and that was down in Austin, in and around Austin, Texas. And one day on the set, we were in a place called Bastrop, in a little town outside of
You can't make
Austin.
that one up.
It was a little. We were shooting there, and this guy comes up to me and he says, "Can you do me a favor?" Now I'm not officially on the crew, but I said, "Yeah, what?" Excuse me. He said, "These people down the street, they're playing this music, and could you go down and ask them not to turn the music down?" I said, "Sure, I'll do that." Well, of course, it turned out the people down the way were black, and that's probably why he came and got me.
Right.
So
this is around 1976, is that right?
No, this is 1974.
Oh, okay. I was
This is 1974.
Looking at the release date for Leadbelly. That's why I thought.
Oh, yeah, that's when the film was released, I guess.
Gotcha.
But so I went down and I talked to the people, and they said, "Oh yeah, they'll turn it off." So they turned it off. I said, "Yeah, they're going to turn it off." Thank you. And I said, "Yeah." So what do you do? He said, "Oh, I'm the location manager." I said, "Oh, really? What is that?" Because see, being the guest of the director, we had the ability to talk to anybody on the set. As you know, a film, the director's guests are treated in a certain manner, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so we were those people, and I would spend a day with different people. So one day I spent a day with the script supervisor. Another day I spent the day with the DP and learned their process. So I didn't spend a day with the location manager, but that was my first understanding that there was such a job. It wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. I wanted to produce, not necessarily direct, but maybe write and produce, maybe a little directing. And so that's how I got started. Then a year or so later, we met a bunch of people, and Bobby and myself, we took our vacation. We would always take our vacations, of course, being in Minnesota in the winter. And we came to California and looked up one of the actors who we become friendly with, a guy named Art Evans. And Art took us to a Christmas party or a holiday party. And at that party, I met Ted Lange. Now, Ted Lange played Isaac on The Love Boat. But so he was doing The Love Boat, but at the same time, he was a directing fellow at AFI when AFI was in Beverly Hills at Greystone Mansion. And he says, "Hey, I'm shooting a movie. You want to work?" He's got these 2 country bumpkins from Minnesota. You want to get some more? So yes, yeah. So we went and helped him work on his first year project, which was called The Great Trained Robbery. It was about these 2 kids that were snatching purses and stuff in a mall. And Jane Kennedy and Glenn Turman and Art Evans were starring in it. And so we did it. I was like the dolly grip and the still photographer. And we did it, and we went back home. And the next year, Ted said, "Hey, I'm doing my second year project. You guys want to come back out and work?" And we said, yeah. We took our vacation again. It was in the winter. And one day when we first started, this young lady who was the first AD said, "Ted, I got a paying job, so I can't do this anymore." And she just quit right there on the spot. She was the first AD. And I was standing nearby and said, "Well, I'll do it." And I didn't know what the heck I was doing. So then I became the still photographer, the dolly grip, the first AD. And in one day, this is the truth, one day I was also the caterer because I'd made chili the night before. We had to move from Fox Hills Mall to a warehouse in Culver City. I ran home, heated up the chili, had pre-ordered some salad for the 2 vegetarian actors. Went by, it was a place on Santa Monica called Duke's. They had made the salad. So I went, heated up the chili, grabbed the salads, and came back and served lunch. But I mean, I was, that was the youth in me. I was 25, 26, something like that. Anyway, so I did that, and then I stayed and actually AD'd another film shoot for, Marilyn Bergman. Marilyn, who she is?
Why does that sound familiar? I don't, but Marilyn Bergman.
She's a songwriter. She wrote The Way We Were.
Oh,
she
wow.
Wrote the theme
Okay.
She wrote the theme to Good Times.
Okay.
And some other stuff. She and her husband.
Oh, yeah, I'm looking. It's like Heat of the Night. She did quite a bit.
Yeah. She was directing a piece at the Women's Directing Workshop at AFI. So I was her first AD on her picture. It was called The Tooth. So I went back to Minnesota and I said, you know what? If I ever come back to California, it's for good. First of all, watching people buy Christmas trees with short sleeve shirts on was just like, I couldn't believe it. Having lived 27 years in Minnesota, it's like, there's just no sense in living in this. And I don't even know why people continue to live here. I mean, I understand the other parts of the values and blah, 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 but this weather is just too crazy. So September of 77, there's a little thing, if you're from the Midwest or from the East Coast, there's a little thing that happens in the fall, and this little thing happens in the air. It's like a ting. And
here comes the snow.
Here it comes, and that ting happened to me, and I think the next week I was on a plane. So I think it was September 27th or something, or 28th. I was on a plane to LA, and that's where I did. And I came out here and I stage managed to play for Ted. This was the first, and I'd never stage managed before either. And did a stage manage to play for Ted, and I met Reuben Cannon and Stan Margulies, who were casting for the second Roots. And they bought me a lunch twice when I worked with them, the first time for the women's open call and the second time for the men's open call. And I handed them my little resume with my little Minnesota stuff and my AFI stuff and told them I'd love to be a PA. And they said, yeah, okay. But I found out that they were shooting, so I figured I lost out on that. And then another group called me based on doing that stage managing to stage manage a union play at the Coronet Theater on La Cienega. So I met with the director, the producers, and they said, well, you haven't really got any experience. You think you could do this? Because a lot of these people have worked on Broadway. And I said, oh, yes, I can do it. Yes, I can do it.
Of course.
So they gave me the job. And then I panicked. And I ran up to, there's a bookstore in Hollywood called Larry Edmonds Bookstore. And I ran up to Larry Edmonds that night and got a book on stage managing.
What is this job?
I started cramming us. So then I came back, and here's, I'll tell you how, at this point, I'll name some names, but Ren Woods was this lead in this piece. And she had done, I forgot what she had done on Broadway. And her understudy was Cheryl Lee Ralph. Okay, now Cheryl Lee went on to do Dreamgirls on Broadway, and then a great career in film and television. But we were all new, and 6 weeks or about 3 weeks into rehearsal, and I took my lumps. They know when you're new, and you know how people mess with you. So they mess with me. But I was holding my own. But about 4 weeks into rehearsals, I get this call from Warner Brothers. And because back then you check your service all the time. That's what it was. You had a service number, so you would check your service. And I just felt sorry for those service people, because you people would call in 2 or 3 times a day, knowing they didn't have any calls, but they called. And I was one of them. So I called in. They said, "Yes, you have a call from Warner Brothers and this number down." So I called them back, and they said, "Yeah, you work with Stan Margulies and Reuben Cannon." And we've been shooting Roots, but what we've done is each episode we have a new person as the PA, and your turn has come up. This is for episode 4. Would you like to do it? Now I'm stage managing this play, but this is what I really want to do.
Yeah, right.
So I go back to the producers and tell them, "Listen, this has come up," and it was only for 4 weeks, but I still wanted to do that. So I don't know if they were glad I was leaving or what, but they let me go, and I left and turned up and went to Warner Brothers. And that first day of working on a lot, you go through those gates, was like, wow, here it is. So I was a PA, and they held the PA that they had previously from the third show. Each episode was 2 hours. So that's why it was 20 days of shoot, or 3 or 4 weeks. But I don't know if they thought they'd wonder how it would do. So they didn't get rid of the PA from the last show, who happened to be Frank Sinatra's niece. Her name was Tina, and just to see what I would do. And so there was episode 5. So I was on 4, so 5, 6, and 7, and I wound up working the whole show. I did the whole rest of the show, and they wound up sending me to Bakersfield to cast extras. And
so you were a production assistant on the show.
As a production assistant,
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I was glad, I wasn't just Xeroxing now. Because I'm the head of the company now, so I'm and Alison, both of you know this. When you go somewhere that doesn't hit filming a lot or something, you are the movie people.
Right.
They call you the movie people. So I was the movie people ahead of the company. Casting extras, that was big time for me. So I did that, and then in the last episode, there was a character played by Marlon Brando. He played the head of the Nazis in Maryland, and everything that he was shooting was on stage, but they needed an establishing shot of a house supposedly in Maryland. So Don Garrison was the location manager on the show, and Don's back went on him, and Don was at home on the floor. So they came to me and they said, "Listen, you call him every morning, and he'll tell you what to do, and you do that, da 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 da." So I did that. I was still the PA, right? So I did, and it was the house that he had found up in Pasadena, but it was a very secluded area on San Rafael. And I had to we were just going to do establishing, but you still had to, at the time with Pasadena, you still had to get signatures.
Oh, so okay.
I went
That's amazing.
So
that's amazing that Pasadena was requiring signatures
even for
long ago.
Establishing.
Oh, no. Pasadena, what Pasadena is now is, you just wouldn't believe what it was then. But anyway, I went out with the signatures, and then, they're like, was he going to be able to get the signatures? Because that whole thing of being black and, me having to walk up to the doors, they wouldn't say it, but, there you go. So anyway, it was raining that day. So I come back with the signature sheet that one of the doors that I knocked on was Stephen Cannell's house.
Oh, wow.
And they were like, "Oh, yeah, really? That's what you're doing?" And they signed off, and that was it. So I come back with the list, and of course, a few raindrops had hit the list. So, the little stuff had bled a little bit, but it really looked like he was really out there. You know what I mean? And I turned in the list, and they were, "Oh, great. Anyway, so at the end of the show, a guy named Terry Nelson, who was the UPM, says, "We really think you can make it in this business, but you're going to need to be in some union or guild." I'm thinking, I'm going to get into the Producers Guild. I only get into this. Yeah. They said, but we think you could make it as a location person. Would you like to be in the Teamsters as a location manager? And I said, I hadn't really thought about that, but here was an offer, so you don't turn any offer down.
No, absolutely
Right.
not.
And I said, yes. And, it's like being the stage manager, right? Yes. So it wasn't, so I got in. It was a handshake and stuff, and I got in. And I only did one show as an assistant, and that was on a TV movie at Universal. And then, they had tiers of pay tiers, but I was getting paid on the lowest level, but they gave me my own series. And I was fairly new to California. So at that time there was a Thomas guy. And, so I was trying to handle it. So I handled it.
What series was that for?
It was called Mrs. Columbo.
Oh, really? Okay.
Do you remember that?
I remember Columbo. My grandmother was a big Peter Falk Columbo fan. I think I remember the show spinoff coming later, but I don't think I ever saw it.
Yeah, Mrs. Columbo, of course, was the spinoff. And did you ever see Orange is the New Black?
Yeah, absolutely.
The woman who played Red, the cook in Orange is the New Black.
Yeah, Kate.
She was Columbo's wife, and that's who the series was based on her, or based on that character. And,
so it's Kate Mulgrew.
Pardon me?
Kate Mulgrew.
Yes, Kate Mulgrew. Mulgrew.
I think that's hilarious because Columbo was always talking about his wife, and they never showed her.
Yeah, you never saw her. That's right.
So I did that episode. I did that for a while, and then I went away. So at Universal, you didn't have alternating location managers or assistants. You just had this big room full of people who were all doing different shows. So if you had a first unit, a second unit, whatever, you did everything,
Right.
And it was crazy. So anyway, I went away and went to, what was it? I went to Fox and did Fall Guy. And Fall Guy had alternating location man. I said, no, this is the way it should be,
Right.
It was only the two of us. It was still only the two of us, but I mean, it was all right.
Right.
So then I think I bounced over to Paramount. And that was a good thing for me. I think that I never really stayed at any place. So I got known around different places in town. And I went to Paramount and I did a thing called Here's Boomer. And they had alternating location managers. So when I came back to Universal, I was doing Knight Rider. And they still had the one. They still had the one location manager. Now the second unit on Knight Rider is as big as the first unit almost, because you got a car that's got to go places and tear through things,
right.
And it's flips and all that stuff. So the deal would be to open up the shooting company, the A company, maybe trying to get over to the second unit, and then go back and scout with the director for the next episode.
Holy cow! I can't imagine.
So, I just told him, yes, I can't do it. I said, and then, when you want it, you got to have your argument together. So the head of TV production says, oh, the big guy can't. I said, no. And I said, besides, you guys budget a location manager for 2 weeks on each episode.
Right.
What happens to that other money? Because and he just looked at me and rolled his eyes and walked away. And that's what started alternating location manager at Universal and the television, was that conversation. So we did at least have alternating then. And so I did that. And but that's how I got into locations, by Don Garrison's back going out on it.
Well, that was why I was frustrated earlier when I was doing the initial research on some of the early projects you worked on. I know that IMDb has played catch up with some of this, but not to have anyone listed.
Yeah.
You're not listed at all for Knight Rider. I mean, in fact, there's nobody really listed as locations management for Knight Rider in some of these shows, and that's partly thanks to the LMGI that we are getting more recognition for the role. But forever, location management wasn't taken as seriously. People didn't recognize the effort and the energy, but you definitely deserve it because you were obviously doing a lot of work before the things that show up around the early 80s in your IMDb listing.
And then we would be listed under other crew.
Other.
As opposed
with
to
other and miscellaneous.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And I mean, IMDb wasn't even around way back then. So
well, of course,
they, that's just pulling off old, that's trying to get current with old information and try to list it up to date. And, it's just interesting when you try to load the happenings from the 70s and 80s.
Right.
Into IMDb. I don't think, I remember the day that I discovered IMDb was important because I never had paid any mind to that until I went to an interview, and I was interviewing with the actual director and producer, I guess a showrunner on a show, and when I walked in, he had my IMDb page printed out on the desk.
Wow!
And I was like, oh my goodness, because I'm used to carrying in my resume.
Sure.
But I said, oh, wow, they actually pay attention to this. I should look at it and see if it's current or accurate.
Right.
I remember that moment.
And that's what I tell, when I speak at schools and colleges and stuff like that. If you've got an interview coming up, you go on IMDb and look up the people you're going to meet with.
Absolutely.
To see what they've done, to see if because you really, in the essence, even though you don't want to take the real posture, but you're interviewing them as well as them interviewing you.
Absolutely.
And,
absolutely.
And so you want to know as much about whoever's interviewing you as you possibly can. Yeah. And there's another, I have to ask my daughter Imani because she really keeps up with all this stuff. And maybe you guys know, there's another search engine that is being used a lot too, alongside or instead of IMDb. They said that you really get more in-depth contacts with people and stuff like that. So I'll have to find out what that is.
Yeah, I'd love to know what that is. You don't happen to know what it is, do you, Alison?
No, but I had this conversation with Kokayi, and he said exactly the same thing that he was going to ask Imani and tell me.
Will I be able to text while I'm doing this?
Sure, it won't interrupt anything, I promise. So, Kokayi, take a minute to talk a little bit about what that was like. What was the industry like, and what did it feel like for you as a black man entering the industry at that time during the era that you did? Yeah, I'm just curious how you were received. Walking onto set, you're being introduced as the location manager. How was that? What was going on? It wasn't just that. It was how my first job, I was telling you, was at Universal, and I did Mrs. Columbo, and the person who was the head of that department, we did have a department head who was an administrator. So she walked me over to the stage. They were on stage and said, "This is your new location manager." And this grip or somebody was up on the bed, it's actually, now, it's different, because how noisy a set is when people are moving to set up something. Yeah.
But it seemed like everything stopped when I walked on the stage. It's like, and it didn't, it didn't, but it was in my mind. And she introduced me, and one of these grips up at the top of the bed said, "Oh, where are we going now, Kokayi?
Oh my God, are you kidding me? Wow.
No. And the stage fell out laughing. So there I was standing there with Vivian, that was her name. So that was my first day as a location manager on a show, and that was on Mrs. Columbo. Because at that time, especially then, Kokayi was predominantly African-American. Now I think he's pretty much Hispanic. But so anyway, that was my first day. And so it wasn't necessarily when I went out to talk to people about that. It was also within the film's community as well.
Right.
And what I was told when they got me in, the same Terry Nelson that got me in, he said, "Well, listen, as you're probably going to get on shows that are always going to be downtown or in the inner city." I don't know if he said inner city or ghetto or what he said, but until they learn what you can do, and then you'll get other shows. So that didn't happen. I got all the shows that went to Newhall, went to what is now Santa Clarita. Before it was Santa Clarita, and these were really country western places at that time. It wasn't anywhere built up like it is now. And you go on, what is that? What is that road with the halfway houses on? What is that highway? Sierra Highway.
Sierra Highway, yeah.
All along Sierra Highway, there were these country western bars. And this is where we shot. This is where, because you could tear up cars out there. You could turn cars over. So it would be like that scene in the Blues Brothers when they played the country western band and everybody stops when they walk in. I would get that so much walking in those places. But, I was coming in there representing a big company and money. And so they were okay. And, but doing those shows prepared me. One, for the time constraint, getting things done. Two, for stunt work, stuff like that, and pyrotechnics and those kind of clearances and stuff that you needed to do. Working with the police, working with the officials, the road department, all that stuff. Flagmen ahead, prepare to stop. All that, all those signs and all that stuff. I can remember one time, and you guys know what this is. We had it was sad. We were doing this one thing, and I went down to the highway department and said, you got to have a plan, a traffic plan. And I sat there at a desk trying to draw the traffic plan.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
I felt so sorry for me. And the engineer at the place drew it out for me.
Gosh.
And I didn't know about going to get a company. You know what I mean? Go get a company to do the plan for me. I was sitting there trying to do the 823 flag. You know what I mean? All that stuff. It was hilarious. It's hilarious now. Anyway, I got the location and. So all of that stuff, but it was like trial by air and fire, and so we got it done. But it was like that, and then it was, our brothers, here, location people are in the Teamsters 399 now. But it says it was the first location manager. I don't know about the East Coast and stuff like that. But I was the first location manager in the union in 399, African American. So I don't know, there may have been somebody else doing locations or whatever, but that's the actual kind of significance or whatever that associated with that. But our drivers were not. They were the same as everybody because most of them lived out there on Sierra Highway or out that way. So they weren't all that receptive when I'm telling them you can't park here, you can't do. It was a little rough, but you stand your ground.
Yeah, you're reminding me of like that scene in Beverly Hills Cop with Eddie Murphy walking into the country western bar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I wasn't doing that. I'm the new sheriff in town thing. I wasn't doing all that. No. But I did want to go home. There was no camera crew behind me like it was with Eddie.
Right.
But so it was a little touch and go. But what was happening? There was a community, not a community, but a Black organization. It was called the Alliance of Black Entertainment Technicians, ABET, that was formed at that time, and they had a function, and I got introduced, and now these are people who are camera people, hair, makeup, a lot of positions that are first ADs or who are Black who were working in it. And somebody said, well, hey, send that location guy stand up because I had never seen a Black location person before.
Oh,
I had to stand
God.
up because, even Black people in the industry hadn't seen anybody who was a location person at that time. Yeah.
Well, I just, this is the first opportunity I've had to talk to somebody that worked on some of these iconic TV shows that people remember so fondly from the 70s that kind of exemplify the type of television that was going on at that time. Things like A-Team and Knight Rider and Fall Guy. And I know there's some people listening that really enjoy those shows. And even though they may or may not have been old enough to see them in their first run, have seen them since then. But I definitely wanted to know what it was like, what was the industry like making shows like that at that time?
Yeah, television was king then.
Yeah.
Not that it's not now, but in those shows, Knight Rider, Kit would show up, and you would have people who were either dressed like Michael or whatever. Especially with the A-Team, we would show up with people. I don't mean to switch to another show, but
not at all.
The
Go right
A-Team,
ahead.
you would have people who were dressed like Mr. T or like one of the other characters' kids. And I think for I'll tell you two stories. I'll tell you the when I was doing the A-Team, Mr. T could never say my name.
Oh, really?
So
okay.
yeah. So when he would see me, he'd say, "Hey, my man, how you doing, my man?" And I say, "Hey, T, how you doing?" "Okay, good." So then one day we're at craft service, and I'm standing there, and T comes up with the script for the next week's show, and dialogue. I keep telling them, "Don't be writing me so much dialogue. I don't like dialogue." Now this is an actor complaining because he's got lines. You know what I mean?
Right.
I just thought that was really hilarious. But I really had a problem with the A-Team. Before, I told you I worked at a community agency, and we did a lot of stuff. Like we even had like a situation where two guys in the community who had different rival groups were going to fight. And we had the boxing franchise. As a matter of fact, I was the boxing commissioner for Golden Gloves at that time in St. Paul. So what we did is we got the two guys and said, let's put on a fight. And you guys can box it out in the ring. We'll get a ring. We'll get a judge. We'll get, the whole thing set up. So we worked with the Recton Parks to diffuse the situation. That's really what it was all about, to diffuse the situation. Mm-hmm. So we called it the Brawl in St. Paul. And back in those days, Ali and Frazier. So we had our own little TV studio. So we interviewed the two guys. We did all of that, went out and shot them training. And we advertised on the black radio station that was on from sun up to sundown. That's the way the black radio station was in the Twin Cities at that point. You didn't have overnight black radio. And we had this big thing, and these guys boxed, and the winner got so much money, and the loser got another 1/3, whatever. So having that background, and like I told you, Mahmoud El-Kati having put all of this black history in our heads, I had a big thing about doing the A-Team, because here you had a show where these grown men are jumping out of a vehicle with automatic weapons and just lighting everything up. And this was really the height of drive-bys and stuff like that were going on during that time. Mm-hmm. So I know there was always billed as a human cartoon where no one dies. I think the statistic was only one person's really ever died in the A-Team, but it was still the image. But we were the number one show in the world.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
People would just, the A-Team's going to be people. You'd have almost 3 or 4 extra security people just to keep people back. So it was good in some aspect, and definitely good for my training, because, like I said, the second units were as big as the first units, and learned a lot, because the A-Team went all over the world, supposedly, helping people out. And so I learned about some marine stuff, arranging boats and, battles on the beach and all that kind of stuff, and whatever it was. But it was great working on those shows because of their popularity.
Oh, I bet.
Some of them I just had a little problem with socially.
Yeah. Mm. Don't let me forget. I hope I hate to have gone down this rabbit hole, but I do want to get back to talking a little bit about Gordon Parks as well. Mm. Big fan of his photography, and I'm a little bit of a photography buff, so try and help me remember. But I appreciate you telling that story about Mr. T, because I do remember the first time I saw Mr. T, I was like, who is this guy with the mohawk and the hair? It was like on a competition show, like World's Greatest Bouncers or something on ESPN.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. He was a bouncer.
Yeah, and I remember him winning, like crashing through walls, and how far he could throw a little person, that was the kind of thing they were doing. It was just something you would never get away with doing today. But I remember him and like wondering who this guy was, and then all of a sudden you see A-Team and things like that.
Then he did Rocky.
Yep.
As one of the.
Oh yeah, Rocky.
Yep.
I forgot about that.
So, Alison, when did you meet Kokayi? Do you remember when it was that you guys first?
In 1996.
Okay, and how long had you been in the business at that time? 6 months, a year.
6 months.
So
yeah, I got in the film industry like in the fall or summer of '95, I'd say. And I hadn't done much, and then
How did you get in?
I got in, it's crazy because I had moved to Los Angeles. I was originally from Los Angeles, so I have a lot of family here, but I also have a lot of family in Indiana, which is where I grew up. And I came to Los Angeles thinking I would get into event planning, but because that was sort of the skill set I had and what I loved. And I was practical. I got a job with Eli Lilly selling pharmaceuticals. And so they moved me here. And what I would do is at night, I would part-time working for event planners. This one event planner, in fact, along came Mary. She used to do all the movie premieres and everything. And so I would literally put on black and whites, caterer, and I would work for her. And then at night I would take notes on how she threw these incredible parties. And the industry for event planning was pretty saturated, I felt, when I was here. But a friend of mine, my college roommate, Kathy McDonald Jones, was working as an assistant production coordinator. And she invited me to come to lunch one day. And I went to lunch with her. And, I had never been any of these kind of places. Like, what did this stuff mean? I wasn't aiming for the film business. And I was walking through the production office with her, and I walked past the location office. And I glanced in, and there were all these photos on the wall and, all this stuff. And I said, what do those guys do? And she explained it to me, as much as she could. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. And then, mind you, I did not like pharmaceutical sales at all. I've never been corporate-y like that. And,
I don't think
but
any
it was
of us
practical.
are.
It got me here. I had a job with a paycheck and a car and insurance. So I called her one day and I said, do you remember those location people? Like, they sound like event planners.
You're right.
Like, I want to talk to one of those people.
Mm-hmm.
And so she had done Devil in a Blue Dress.
Oh, okay.
And Gary DeGala had done the reshoots or something like that for it. And so she called him and said, my friend wants to talk to a location manager. She thinks they're like event planners. And he said, well, she's right, And so she introduced me to Gary, and he said I could come visit. And I did that. And that's how I met Gary and Kristen Dewey, who is still one of my dear friends, and who's now heading up the newsletter, I think, committee that you're on now, Dodd, for LMGI.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But so I went to meet Kristen and Gary, and they were doing Barbed Wire. Do you remember that feature?
Yeah, with Pam Anderson. Yeah.
Anderson.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he would let me come visit, and then Kristen got sick for a couple of days, and I had just been hanging out. Like, I had no idea when I first went. I went like in a suit. And then, of course, found out that that's not how you dress at anything production. But Kristen got sick for like 3 days or something like that. And Gary, since I was there, he said, can you fill in for Kristen? And I did that. And that's how I got my first 3 days, like toward the union. And then... and
you said, sure, right?
I said, sure, exactly. And it's funny because Gary was hilarious. I knew nothing. And I remember Gary leaving me. It was probably just stage or something. Mm-hmm. But Gary left me with a walkie and said he had to go. And he said, listen, if you hear him say locations, just push this button, say go for locations.
That's all it is.
And then try to help them with whatever it is they need.
Right.
And I said, okay, and that was how I started.
Obviously, there's a great deal more to talk about with these two leaders in our industry, Kokayi Ampah and Alison Taylor. Hope you'll join us for the next episode of Locations on 2. You can find more about Locations on 2 at locationson2.com. My name is Dodd Vickers. I'm your host. You can find me online at doddvickers.com. And for more information on the Location Managers Guild International, visit them online at locationmanagers.org. Until next time, I'm switching back to one. Mm-hmm. So I grew up in Georgia and lived a little while in Florida before moving back to Georgia. Loved film, took film classes in college, but never thought there was any way I'd ever work in the industry. And here you are living in California. Did you have any interest in getting into the film industry before this kind of casual introduction to it? Or did you... Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right.